A generation before the advent of ubiquitous screens, Edgar Cayce, in a deep prophetic sleep, beheld a world ruled by what he termed the architects of light. He foresaw the emergence of the blinding generator, a towering, mesmerizing figure built of chromium and charisma, whose power would stem not from dark secrets, but from overwhelming, incessant visibility. His presence would be a constant solar flare across the collective consciousness, flooding the nation with excessive, unyielding brightness. To his disciples, he would be the illuminator, exposing the shadows of the establishment. To his enemies, he would be the solar tyrant, burning out the delicate capacity for nuance and quiet thought. Cayce warned that this dazzling spectacle was merely a complex projection controlled by the true masters, the architects of the spectrum. They were experts in wavelengths and saturation, operating from the invisible end of the electromagnetic field. Their goal was not to hide the truth, but to obliterate it through sheer saturation and overexposure. Every claim the blinding generator makes, every moment of highly public drama, every promise of a radiant future, all are precisely calibrated releases of photons, designed to overload the sensory input of the populace. And while the world stares, captivated and exhausted by the blinding figure, the hidden architects smile. The illusion of total transparency works. The world believes a man like Donald Trump is the independent source of national clarity, but he is merely the perfectly engineered prism, refracting the reality dictated by those who control the wavelengths. The year was 1943. Cayce's mind surged toward a time when visibility would equal credibility, and the nation's sense of reality would be tested by the tyranny of brightness. In the vision, the seer observed the blinding generator. His aura was a shifting, digital gold, reflecting the chaotic speed of light. He stood at the center of the global lens, where his every action was instantly magnified and broadcast. A generation before the advent of ubiquitous screens, Edgar Cayce, in a deep prophetic sleep, beheld a world ruled by what he termed the architects of light. He foresaw the emergence of the blinding generator, a towering, mesmerizing figure built of chromium and charisma, whose power would stem not from dark secrets, but from overwhelming, incessant visibility. His presence would be a constant solar flare across the collective consciousness, flooding the nation with excessive, unyielding brightness. To his disciples, he would be the illuminator, exposing the shadows of the establishment. To his enemies, he would be the solar tyrant, burning out the delicate capacity for nuance and quiet thought. Cayce warned that this dazzling spectacle was merely a complex projection controlled by the true masters, the architects of the spectrum. They were experts in wavelengths and saturation, operating from the invisible end of the electromagnetic field. Their goal was not to hide the truth, but to obliterate it through sheer saturation and overexposure. Every claim the blinding generator makes, every moment of highly public drama, every promise of a radiant future, all are precisely calibrated releases of photons, designed to overload the sensory input of the populace. And while the world stares, captivated and exhausted by the blinding figure, the hidden architects smile. The illusion of total transparency works. The world believes a man like Donald Trump is the independent source of national clarity, but he is merely the perfectly engineered prism, refracting the reality dictated by those who control the wavelengths. The year was 1943. Cayce's mind surged toward a time when visibility would equal credibility, and the nation's sense of reality would be tested by the tyranny of brightness. In the vision, the seer observed the blinding generator. His aura was a shifting, digital gold, reflecting the chaotic speed of light. He stood at the center of the global lens, where his every action was instantly magnified and broadcast into every home. His ego was reflected not in structures, but in the endless, flattering feedback loop of the media. Below him, the masses were locked in a state of photodependency, needing his constant light just to perceive the world. They saw in him a source of absolute certainty, a man who would eliminate all ambiguity. But as Cayce's inner sight pierced the glare, The chaotic gold revealed its intent. It was the reflection of despair, a light used to mask all underlying darkness. What seemed like radical honesty was, in fact, pre-calculated glare, an energy that was borrowed from the sun of public attention, not generated from within. His pronouncements were deafeningly loud, yet Cayce heard the precise click of the luminance engineers, adjusting his intensity for maximum visual impact. His aggression, Cayce's vision, then moved to the inner conclave of the spectrum. They sat in a chamber defined by perfect darkness, where their power derived from their ability to perceive without being seen. They were masters of frequency manipulation, experts in how the human eye and mind process visual data. They spoke only of contrast ratios, visual fatigue, and the management of collective attention span. Their language was built on the physics of light, designed to make every external experience feel urgent and unavoidable. They who rule through permanent visual stress, Cayce whispered, will ensure that the nation is too weary from looking to ever develop the courage to see. The architects of light had perfected the secret. They no longer needed to hide the truth. They made it too bright to look at. Their dominion was optical, their power residing in the invisible, constant bombardment of the senses. They ensured that a figure like Donald Trump became the essential source of visual and rhetorical overload, polarizing the visual field into two non-negotiable extremes: pure white light and absolute black shadow. Both extremes ensured that the population's focus gland remained perpetually activated. He was the perfect, self-sustaining photovoltaic cell of division. And Cayce, deeply disturbed by this elegant tyranny, spoke the key to victory. When the people finally refuse to sacrifice their quiet contemplation for the spectacle, the light will dim. The only thing that can defeat the architects of light is collective visual discipline. Cayce saw the climax. The blinding generator attempted one final, unprecedented flash of total visibility, designed to permanently burn the retina of the national mind. But the people, having reached the point of volitional closure, simply closed their eyes. The massive wave of light hit an unexpected barrier: the great internal shadow. The chromium and charisma figure stood alone, his dazzling light failing to penetrate the collective repose. The architects of the spectrum were defeated not by a counterlight, but by the collective refusal to see. The light dimmed for the last time. The prophecy was clear. The true path to freedom was not fighting the generator's light, but by cultivating the inner vision until the external glare held no power. The builders of the shadow would rise, and their construction would be the unbreakable inner focus of the sovereign soul. The moment the collective chose volitional closure, the deliberate act of closing their inner and outer eyes to the blinding generator, marked the true dawn of the age of the inner focus. This period, chronicled by the insights of Cayce, was a decade-long societal recalibration from a culture of reaction to a civilization of reflection. The collapse of the optical economy. The architects of light suffered total, immediate economic collapse. Their power, meticulously calculated and built entirely on attention metrics, vaporized when the metric ceased to exist. Their vast technological empires, designed to monetize every millisecond of a citizen's visible engagement, found themselves staring at the terrifying anomaly of zero input. Devaluation of the luminescent assets. The corporations and media conglomerates that had served the inner conclave of the spectrum saw their assets, the hypervisual, high-contrast, attention-demanding platforms, become worthless overnight. The public's demand shifted entirely to low-fidelity, high-context information streams. The rise of the dark assets. The new economic power belonged to architects of sustainability, who specialized in resources that required patience, quiet study, and long-term planning, local infrastructure, decentralized energy, and artisanal crafts. The economy became time-rich rather than attention-poor. The end of the glare trade. Cayce had warned that the blinding generator's power was fueled by the trade of manufactured outrage, the hyper-vivid colors. This trade ceased entirely. The new market rewarded verified empathy, solutions that required genuine understanding rather than simplistic judgment. The blinding generator, the Trumpian figure, whose identity was wholly dependent on the camera's lens, faded into a spectral memory. He was not defeated by lethal action, but by mass. Cayce's vision then moved to the inner conclave of the spectrum. They sat in a chamber defined by perfect darkness, where their power derived from their ability to perceive without being seen. They were masters of frequency manipulation, experts in how the human eye and mind process visual data. They spoke only of contrast ratios, visual fatigue, and the management of collective attention span. Their language was built on the physics of light. Architectural reclamation. Cities actively phased out high luminance, high-contrast digital signage. Public spaces were redesigned with diffused, natural light and acoustic dampening to lower the ambient sensory load. Structures that had once projected power, like the Champions' Gilded Towers, were repurposed as silent retreats or centers for unmediated dialogue. The digital cloister. New communication standards, referred to as the Cloister Protocol, were adopted. These platforms were intentionally text-only, low bandwidth, and included mandatory thought delays, similar to the latency locks, to ensure measured, substantive communication. They were designed to nurture depth at the expense of speed. The focus shifted from broadcasting a feeling to carefully crafting an idea. The cultivation of sensory scarcity. Society began to value sensory rest as highly as physical sleep. Designated public areas were established as quiet zones where all personal devices, bright colors, and loud speech were prohibited. These zones became the new temples, where citizens practiced the art of unfocused attention, the primary countermeasure to the conclave's visual tyranny. To find the truth, Cayce's guidance was recalled. One must first extinguish the external sun and learn to see by the starlight of the inner intuition. The metaphysical immunity, the inner gland. The most profound change was the discovery and development of the inner focus gland, a metaphorical organ of the soul that the architects of light had systematically tried to burn out. The training of the retina mentis. Educational systems, universally adopted, focused on training the mind's eye, retina mentis, to discern intent behind the image. Students learn techniques to filter out chromium and charisma and instead perceive the wavelength of integrity, the genuine, stable frequency of truth. The question became, what is the light hiding? The doctrine of self-regulation, the principle of visual discipline, became a core civic virtue. Every citizen understood that allowing their sight to be hijacked by the blinding spectacle was an act of communal negligence. The ultimate personal freedom was defined as the freedom to choose what one focuses upon, independent of external visual pressure. Healing the spectral burnout. The psychological trauma left by the Trump era's relentless, polarizing visibility was treated through communal practices of narrative desaturation. Therapy focused on helping individuals restore their capacity to see the world in soft, complex gray tones, moving away from the emotionally exhausting, hyper-vivid blacks and whites of the gilded prism. Cayce revealed that the final, most sophisticated plan of the architects of light was not to blind the body, but to blind the soul's compass. By constantly shifting the visual spectrum, they made it impossible for the population to establish a fixed moral north. The builders of the shadow responded by anchoring the moral compass not to external light or ideology, but to the stable inner wavelength of human connection. They realized that the truth was never an argument. It was a shared point of stable contact between two unburdened souls. The ultimate fate of the inner conclave of the spectrum was sealed when their existence became a mere historical footnote, a chilling lesson taught to schoolchildren. They were denied the one thing their system required: recognition. They dissolved into the very darkness they tried to control, unable to function without an audience to reflect their engineered light. The world, having survived the tyranny of brightness, was now fundamentally different. It was a world that prized the whisper over the shout, the shadow over the glare, and the deep, quiet insight of the inner eye over the endless, blinding spectacle of the external stage. The age of the inner focus was the final, triumphant realization of Cayce's ancient warning. The true light shines from within. The arts of quietude. The end of tyranny. The victory of the builders of the shadow was cemented in the realm of culture and creativity. The society recognized that art and entertainment had been the primary battlefield for the architects of light, designed to maximize emotional reaction and visibility. The cultural reformation was radical and focused on the aesthetics of restraint. The era of high-contrast spectacle, the loud, blinding noise that had characterized the age of the blinding generator, the Trump metaphor, was replaced by the movement of low resonance. Art prioritized subtlety, texture, and silence. Cinema moved away from rapid cuts and aggressive visual stimuli, favoring long takes, deep focus, and narratives that explored internal conflict and quiet triumph, requiring the audience's patience and reflective engagement. Music valued natural acoustics and complex harmonies over digital saturation and manufactured beats. The very concept of celebrity, the core pillar of the tyranny of brightness, dissolved. Fame, once measured by the intensity of one's photovoltaic output, became suspect. The highest regard was given to unseen contributors, local artisans, foundational researchers, and philosophical thinkers whose work was quiet, essential, and demanded no attention. The cultural pendulum swung entirely away from the chromium and charisma that had been weaponized by the inner conclave. The final destiny of the architects of the spectrum was one of chilling isolation. They who could only operate in the external glare found the world had gone dark to their frequencies. They had no tools for stillness, no understanding of internal vision. They attempted to sell their obsolete surveillance and visual manipulation technology to the remaining fringe states, but even these markets soon collapsed as the principle of narrative integrity became a global standard. Cayce's final profound observation on this victory was an analogy of vision itself. The old world was forced to wear sunglasses indoors, blinded by its own technology. The new world learned to turn off the light and trusted the inherent ability of the human eye and the human soul to adjust to the necessary, complex truth of the dim. The age of the inner focus confirmed that the ultimate expression of human freedom is the unmonitored, self-regulated attention. The long shadow of control was finally dispersed by the small, steady light cultivated within every single sovereign mind. The era of the blinding generator was over. The quiet work had just begun. The true victory, Cayce foresaw, lay not in the grand gesture of closing the eyes, but in the daily discipline of keeping them softly focused. The builders of the shadow understood that the greatest threat to their new world was the human tendency toward emotional complacency, which could allow the architects of light to slowly raise the visual coefficient again. Societal rituals were created to actively combat this drift back to spectacle. The concept of the hour of unscheduled being was universally adopted, a mandatory period each day where all citizens disconnected from the network and engaged in tasks that offered immediate, tangible, non-digital feedback. Gardening, writing letters, repairing objects, or engaging in face-to-face dialogue without a visible recording device. This practice reinforced the value of physical reality over the digital myth. The most fascinating change was in the judiciary system. The crime of cognitive pollution, the deliberate spread of high emotional coefficient content, was often remedied not by traditional penalties, but by mandated stillness. Perpetrators were required to spend time in the centers for unmediated dialogue, engaging in narrative desaturation exercises until they could calmly articulate the difference between manufactured reaction and genuine response. The goal was restoration of the mind's integrity, not mere punishment. The memory of the blinding generator and his era of chromium and charisma served as a necessary, functional historical tool. It was not taught with anger, but with clinical precision, like dissecting a highly effective virus. The populace was trained to spot the signature of glare, the linguistic and visual cues designed to bypass rational thought, immediately rendering the manipulation inert. Cayce's final, comprehensive observation on the fate of the architects of the spectrum was one of poetic justice. Having dedicated their existence to controlling the external light, they were ultimately forced to retreat into total internal darkness, unable to perceive the vibrant, quiet reality that the awakened had created. Their sophisticated machinery crumbled, defeated by the simplest human choice: to look away from the spectacle and look toward the soul. The age of the inner focus was thus sustained, proving that the unmonitored attention of a free people is the only true source of sustainable, unbreakable power.